John and Marilyn Hayward had lived together for more than 10 years in a small town in Michigan. They were known as a quiet, reserved couple without children. He was a mechanic at a car service station. She was a nurse at a private clinic. They had no financial problems, living in their own house on the outskirts of town, paying off their mortgage for the last year. Neighbors said they kept to themselves, did not take part in street meetings, and rarely invited anyone to their home. John preferred to spend time in the garage, repairing cars and motorcycles, and Marilyn in the garden or reading a book. They were not known to have any loud arguments. In the early years of their marriage, they had many trips together and shared plans. As time went on, John began to talk less about his work, and they spent their evenings apart, he in the garage, she at home. Marilyn didn't pay any attention to this. Many men in their town spent their free time repairing equipment. There were a few odd moments, though. Sometimes John would suddenly leave late at night, citing an urgent order. He would usually return a few hours later, often smelling of machine oil, but sometimes his clothes would smell faintly of household chemicals. He never used a washing machine at home, preferring to wash his work clothes in the sink in the garage. The garage was his personal territory. The door was always locked, and only he had the key. He explained this by saying that there were dangerous tools and chemicals inside. Marilyn did not insist. She had enough work and her own worries. At first glance, their life seemed stable. They paid bills together, went shopping on weekends, celebrated holidays in a small family circle. However, gradually, Marilyn began to notice that John avoided talking about the future. He did not want to discuss children, vacation plans, or large purchases. The turning point came one Sunday morning. John came home in the early hours, saying he was working late, but he was carrying a plastic bag of tools she had never seen him with before. He quickly carried it into the garage and locked the door. That was the first time Marilyn had the feeling that her husband was hiding something serious. In early November, Marilyn woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of a soft creaking floor. John, trying not to make any noise, went down to the garage. A thin strip of light came from under the door, and she clearly heard muffled metallic sounds, as if he was taking something apart or putting something back together. This lasted for almost an hour. When he returned, his hands were damp, and the room smelled as if he had just worked with solvent. The next morning, Marilyn tried to open the garage door, but the lock had been changed. She knew the key would work the day before, having gone in there herself to get gardening tools. Now her own key wouldn't turn. John, noticing her attempt, responded dryly, "It's dangerous in the garage. There are chemicals in there, and I don't want you to get hurt." In the weeks that followed, he began leaving more often, late at night. Sometimes he would say he was going to a friend's house in a nearby town to pick up parts. He would return closer to the morning, quietly walk into the garage, and the next day throw out the bags of thick black polyethylene. Marilyn never saw what was inside. One day when John was at work, she noticed that the garage door was reinforced from the inside with a metal strip. She had only seen this in movies, protection that was difficult to knock out even with force. It seemed unnecessary for storing tools. The situation escalated when a delivery car pulled up to their house, and the courier brought several large cardboard boxes. John managed to intercept the packages at the gate, not allowing them to be brought inside. He quickly carried everything into the garage, locked the door again, and did not explain what exactly he ordered. Soon Marilyn noticed something strange about his behavior. Whereas before he could simply leave his car keys on the kitchen table, now he always carried them with him, even at night. Moreover, one of his keychains had a small USB drive, which he never left unattended. In mid-December, she returned from work to find the garage windows sealed from the inside with thick black film. This was too much. Marilyn felt that her husband was doing everything possible to hide what was happening from her. That evening, after John had left, she tried to go around the back of the garage. Through a crack in the shutter, she noticed a metal frame, like a table or platform, and hooks hanging on chains. The lighting was dim, but in the corner she could see canisters with unknown markings. She jumped back when she heard the sound of a motor. John was returning. Marilyn quickly returned to the house and tried to act as if nothing had happened. But from that moment on, the thought that her husband was involved in something illegal did not leave her for a minute. In early January, Marilyn was driving home from work along the highway leading to their house. It was already dark, and the headlights caught the silhouette of a man on the side of the road. She immediately recognized his gait. It was John. He was standing there holding a black plastic bag in his hands, and looking back, quickly threw it into the ditch, after which he got into his pickup and drove away in the direction of the house. Marilyn slowed down but didn't stop. She knew he shouldn't be there at this time, and the way he was acting made it look like he was trying to hide something. At home, she asked where he'd been, and John, without blinking, said, "Dropping parts." She lay awake that night, turning over in her head what she had seen. In the morning, when John had left for work, she returned to that spot on the highway. The bag was still there. It was heavy and it gave off a sharp chemical smell that almost made her gag. She didn't open it, but simply pushed it deep into the bushes and drove away. But inside, she already knew that it wasn't just trash. That same day, she decided to take a step she had been putting off for months, find a way to get into the garage. Her own keys didn't work, but the lock was an old model. She turned to a neighbor, Bill, who had once helped them change the door hinges. Under the pretext that John had lost his keys, she asked him for a set of lockpicks. When evening came and John had left again, Marilyn inserted the pick into the lock with trembling hands. The lock gave way faster than she expected. The interior smelled of a mixture of machine oil, metal, and something acrid that resembled chlorine. In the middle of the garage stood a metal table with raised sides, leather belts with buckles attached to its edges. Nearby hung chains and hooks, secured to the ceiling beams. In the corner were 3 plastic containers, labeled with incomprehensible abbreviations in marker. On the workbench was a folder of photographs. The first pictures were of cars, clearly taken by John himself, but underneath were photographs of women, some in casual clothes, others in strange poses, clearly taken without their knowledge. The faces in some of the pictures were familiar to Marilyn. She had seen these women on the news when there had been reports of missing persons in the area. She felt a cold sweat trickle down her back. She closed the folder and noticed a metal suitcase under the workbench. The lock was closed, but on the side was a sticker with dates, 3 years in a row, several months apart. The dates didn't match up with their family events, but they oddly matched the disappearances that had been discussed in the news. Suddenly, she heard the sound of an engine. John's pickup. Panic overtook her. She quickly closed the door, walked out of the garage, and returned the master key to its place. When John entered the house, he did not notice her condition, but for the first time in her life, she felt real fear of him. All night, Marilyn thought about whether she should go to the police, but the thought that if she was wrong, it would ruin their lives, did not allow her to take the decisive step. Besides, she did not know what exactly John kept in those containers and suitcases. The next day, she decided to check one more thing. After John left again, she quietly opened the glove compartment of his car. Inside was a folded map of the county, marked in red marker. Each mark was near where women had disappeared in recent years. She realized that it was not a coincidence, but the evidence was circumstantial, and she still did not know how to act. Now his every look, every movement, every night trip began to seem to her part of something terrible about which she did not yet know the whole truth. Late that evening, returning home, Marilyn noticed John's pickup truck parked at the end of an empty street near an abandoned warehouse. The light in the cabin was off, but she confidently recognized her husband's silhouette. He was standing by the open trunk, throwing something inside, and fresh stains were darkening on the asphalt near the wheels. In the light of the flashlight, they shimmered brown. She drove past, trying not to attract attention, and stopped around the corner. A few minutes later, John closed the trunk, got into the car, and drove away in the opposite direction from the house. Marilyn, without thinking, returned to the warehouse. The stains were sticky and had the same smell as the bag on the highway, a mixture of metal and chemicals. She realized it was blood, but she didn't know whose. That night, she called the police for the first time, but instead of directly reporting her suspicions, she made an anonymous call to the local department, reporting strange activity at the warehouse. She was afraid to give her name, not only for fear of John, but also because she had no direct evidence of his involvement in anything. 2 days later, Detective James Westbrook came to their home. He introduced himself as an employee of the Missing Persons Unit. He said that the reason for the visit was a routine check related to several cases in the area. John responded calmly, joked, and even offered to show his garage. But to Marilyn's surprise, the detective refused, citing the fact that he did not have a warrant. After that visit, John became even more withdrawn. He installed an extra lock on the gate, installed a security camera in the garage, and began storing his pickup in a rented storage space on the next block. Now he could drive it away without going through the main yard. Marilyn increasingly realized that she couldn't handle this alone. She decided to meet the detective secretly. Under the guise of going to the store, she drove up to the station and, after waiting for John to leave for work, went inside. In Westbrook's office, she told him about the locks, the night trips, the finds in the garage, and the package on the highway. The detective listened carefully and asked several clarifying questions. When exactly John began to change his habits, what areas he visited at night, what things appeared or disappeared in the house. When Marilyn mentioned a red-marked county map, Westbrook tensed up. He had seen similar maps on other suspects. He explained that John could be linked to at least 3 disappearances in the last 5 years. All the victims were young women seen in areas with auto repair shops or industrial areas. The location where she saw the pickup truck at the warehouse was within the search radius of the most recent missing person, Emily Clark. The detective asked Marilyn to help him gather evidence. To do this, he handed her a small tape recorder and suggested that she try to record a conversation with her husband in which it would be possible to record his confession or hints of involvement. The next night, while having dinner with John, she brought up the news. The missing Emily had been mentioned. John reacted unexpectedly. He chuckled and said that girls like that would be better off staying home. It sounded cold and distant. Marilyn gently steered the conversation toward the topic, but he quickly changed it, noticing that she was being too persistent. A few days later, the police set up surveillance. John drove out to the industrial area twice at night and once to an old farm outside the city. He stayed there for almost 2 hours. When he left, a forensics team inspected the area and found a freshly dug hole covered with sheets of plywood. Inside were the remains of charred material and pieces of fabric. Marilyn didn't know about the find. The detective only told her that the investigation was close to a decisive stage, but she saw that John had become irritable, began checking her whereabouts more often, and once asked directly if she had met with anyone from the police. At that moment, she realized that her life was in danger, but now there was no turning back. The police were preparing a search warrant, and all she could do was wait and pretend that everything was fine. The night was quiet when Marilyn woke to a faint sound, like something heavy and metallic being dragged across the floor. She listened. Footsteps, slow, muffled, as if John were walking in his socks. She peered cautiously into the hallway and saw him walking down to the garage, holding a large plastic container. Through the slightly open door, she noticed that the container was half filled with some dark, damp material. John placed it on the table, took a large knife from under the workbench, and began cutting or separating something. The movements were measured, concentrated, as if he was doing something he was used to repeating dozens of times. Marilyn recoiled, her heart pounding in her ears. She returned to the bedroom, but she could no longer sleep. She lay motionless until dawn, replaying what she had seen in her mind. In the morning, as soon as John left, there was a knock on the door. It was Detective Westbrook and 2 plainclothes officers. He quietly announced that a warrant had been received and that the operation would begin that day. Marilyn was asked to leave the house and not return until the search was complete, but she insisted that she wanted to be a witness. It was important for her to see what exactly her husband was hiding. At 10:15 a.m., 4 patrol cars and a forensics van pulled out onto the street. John was at work at the time, and he was detained right at the gates of the auto repair shop. He offered no resistance, but, according to eyewitnesses, he remained silent the entire time and looked straight at the ground. Meanwhile, investigators began searching the garage. The first thing they noticed was a metal table with straps covered in what looked like brown stains. A quick test showed that it was blood. In the containers, they found scraps of women's clothing soaked in a mixture of motor oil and bleach. In one of the drawers under the workbench, there was a package made of thick plastic, inside which were items belonging to different women: earrings, a phone, a driver's license. On the top shelf, behind the toolboxes, were 3 photo albums. The first contained pictures of cars and landscapes, but the second and third contained pictures of women in various settings, including John's garage. Some of the pictures showed signs of damage, but their faces were clearly visible. 3 of them were already listed as missing in the database. When the experts opened the metal suitcase that Marilyn had seen earlier, they found bags with tags inside. Each tag had a date and initial. Experts later determined that the bags contained fragments of fabric and hair from the victims. The next find was in the basement. Behind a rack of canned goods, they found an entrance to a small windowless room. The floor was covered with linoleum, and the walls were covered with soundproofing panels. Inside, there was a chair with leather straps attached to it and 2 bright construction spotlights. The smell was pungent, chemical. At the same time, a search was conducted in John's rented box. There, they found a tarpaulin with large brown stains, canisters with industrial solvent, and another plastic container in which there were bundles of women's bags and shoes. Detectives confirmed that all of these finds are linked to at least 5 women who went missing between 2007 and 2019. 3 of them were seen alive in their final hours near places where John worked or visited. By midday, he was brought to the department. At the first interrogation, he remained silent, citing his right not to testify. But when he was shown photographs from the garage and a suitcase with labels, he quietly said, "You still won't prove anything." Marilyn was in a separate room at the time, giving her testimony. She was questioned about all the strange incidents she recalled over the years of marriage: nighttime departures, packages, locks on doors, parcels, new tools. She admitted that a month ago she was afraid to believe what was happening, but after the night with the container, she had no doubts left. That evening, the county police press service made a statement. A man suspected of a series of brutal murders had been detained, and FBI experts had been brought in to investigate. John Hayward's name and his photo were on all the local news channels. For Marilyn, it all happened so fast that she didn't have time to realize that she would never see her husband free again. The house where they had lived for 13 years became a crime scene. The garage and basement were sealed off. The area was cordoned off. The lawn was covered in tire tracks from the crime scene vans, and a no entry sign hung on the fence. The investigation continued for months, but already in the first days after the search, it became clear John had been leading a double life throughout their marriage, and his garage renovation was just a cover for a systematic hunt for victims. John Hayward's trial began 9 months after his arrest. Prosecutors charged him with 5 counts of aggravated murder, as well as several counts of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and possession of evidence related to crimes. The main evidence was items belonging to the victims found in the garage and rented box, photographs, as well as DNA testing results, which confirmed the presence of biological traces of the 3 missing women on equipment and in containers. The jury was particularly interested in photo albums stored in the house and a suitcase with packages with dates and initials on them. Hayward's lawyers tried to claim that some of the evidence could have been planted and that the items found were just artifacts from junk markets and dumps. However, the totality of the evidence, the testimony of witnesses, as well as anonymous calls and observations of Marilyn recorded in the report, made the defense's position weak. The prosecutor stressed in his speech that the defendant's actions were systematic and carefully planned. He had skills that allowed him to control his victims and destroy traces. The time between disappearances, the records found, and the routes of his movements showed that he acted according to a stable pattern, changing only the details to avoid capture. After 6 weeks of trial, the jury found John Hayward guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 5 life terms without parole. Marilyn only showed up at the beginning of the trial, testifying, and then left the state. According to her lawyer, she changed her name and address because she was receiving threats on social media from people who believed she might have known about her husband's crimes. The Hayward's home was confiscated and sold at auction, with some of the proceeds going to a compensation fund for the victims' families. The garage and basement, where police conducted the bulk of their search, were completely rebuilt by the new owners. The investigation attracted national media coverage, and several documentaries about serial killers featured Hayward as an example of a criminal who led an outwardly quiet life for many years, without arousing suspicion among those closest to him. The case was officially closed a year after the verdict. However, police do not rule out that the number of actual victims may be higher than 5. Several unsolved disappearances in neighboring counties have a similar pattern, and investigators continue to check John Hayward's possible involvement in them.